I met Mike during freshman orientation. One of those awkward days where everyone's trying too hard to seem interesting. He was standing near the vending machines, complaining loudly that the coffee tasted like burnt hope, and I laughed before I could stop myself. He turned, grinning like he'd been waiting for someone to join the joke. That grin, wide, crooked, easy, was how our friendship began. By the end of that week, we'd already fallen into a rhythm. Mike was studying mechanical engineering, I was in communications, but we clicked instantly. He was loud where I was quiet, spontaneous where I overthought everything. He dragged me to late-night diner runs, to study groups that turned into pizza fights, to half-baked road trips that started as let's get groceries, and ended with us watching the sunrise 2 towns over. We never ran out of things to say, or things not to say. He was one of those people who could make silence feel comfortable, like sitting beside him on the couch was enough. Over time, he became home in human form. By sophomore year, our dorm rooms were practically merged. He'd crash on my couch more than his own bed, claim my cereal as community property, and leave his hoodie draped over my chair like a flag. People joked that we were like an old married couple. I'd laugh it off, but sometimes, when I'd catch him asleep on my couch with his hand tucked under his chin, the thought of what that might actually feel like made my chest ache in ways I didn't understand or maybe didn't want to. Then came Tara. She was a junior, pre-law, with sharp eyeliner and a sharper tone. Mike met her at a friend's house party, and within a month she was everywhere, his phone wallpaper, his schedule, his stories. At first, I was happy for him. He'd had flings before, but Tara seemed serious, someone who could challenge him, ground him. That's what I told myself anyway. But from the beginning, she didn't like me. The first time we met, she gave me that quick, polite smile people give when they're trying to figure you out or dismiss you. Her gaze flicked to my shoes, my shirt, the rainbow pin on my backpack, and then she looked away. "You're the Matt, right?" she asked, voice edged with something I couldn't name. "Depends," I said. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She smiled tightly. "Guess we'll see." From then on, every time she was around, the air shifted. She'd slide into conversations like she was testing me, asking little questions that weren't really questions. "So, Matt, you don't have a girlfriend?" "Oh, right. You and Mike spend a lot of time together, huh?" "He's lucky to have such a loyal friend." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Each word coated in sugar, but sharp underneath. Mike, oblivious as ever, laughed it off. "She's just teasing, man. Don't take it seriously." But I did, because I saw what she was doing, planting doubt tiny and poisonous. As months passed, it got worse. She'd text him during our movie nights and he'd answer immediately. She'd roll her eyes when I came around. And whenever Mike and I made plans, she'd suddenly need him. Emotional emergencies. Last-minute dinners. "I don't feel well. Can you come over?" I told myself not to be jealous. After all, they were together. But sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzed and it was Mike texting something stupid like, "You up?" I'd stare at the screen too long before replying. It wasn't just friendship anymore. Not for me. And that realization scared me more than anything. Still, I tried to keep things normal. I laughed at his jokes, I went to his games, I listened to him rant about classes and professors. But every time he mentioned Tara, a piece of me chipped away. Then came the night everything cracked. We were at a house party. One of those crowded student chaos events where everyone's shouting over the music and pretending not to notice the sticky floors. Mike had dragged me there, insisting I needed to get out more. Tara was already there, holding court with her friends near the kitchen. When she saw me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you came." "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Mike invited me." "Of course he did," she muttered, sipping her drink. The night went on like that. Little jabs, quick glances, words she thought I wouldn't catch. I tried to stay away, talking with people I barely knew, but it was hard not to notice the way she clung to Mike's arm every time I got too close, like marking territory. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. The night was cool, the bass from the house thrumming through the walls. I was halfway through a deep breath when the door opened behind me. "Matt." Her voice. I turned. Tara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that sharp smile still plastered on her face. "Can we talk?" I hesitated but nodded. She stepped closer, heels clicking on the patio tiles. "I don't mean to be rude," she started, which was always the prelude to something rude. "But I think it's time you gave Mike some space." I blinked. "What?" "You're always around," she said, her tone measured but cold. "Always calling, always showing up. It's not healthy." I felt my jaw tighten. "We've been friends for years, Tara. I'm not going to disappear because you're uncomfortable." Her smile vanished. "It's not about me being uncomfortable. It's about boundaries. You're clearly attached." "Attached?" She tilted her head. "You know what I mean. You like him. And honestly, it's obvious." The words hit like a slap. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Mike and I still talked, but it was different. Every conversation felt like walking through a room full of glass, careful not to break anything. He'd text me sometimes, short things like, "You in class?" or "Game tonight." But there was always something missing. The warmth, the ease, the spark that used to make even silence feel alive. Tara hadn't spoken to me since that night. Fine by me. I didn't need her to, but I could feel her shadow in every space Mike and I shared, the invisible wedge she'd driven between us. Then, one Friday night, just past midnight, there was a knock on my dorm door. Sharp, urgent. I opened it to find Mike standing there, looking wrecked. His hoodie was unzipped halfway, his hair a mess, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Mike," I said quietly. He didn't answer right away, just stepped past me into the room and leaned against the wall like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "Sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know where else to go." The words hit something deep inside me, because no matter how messy things got, he still came to me. I closed the door behind him. "What happened?" He exhaled hard, raking a hand through his hair. "We had another fight. She told me I had to choose. Between her and you." I froze. "What?" He nodded, laughing bitterly. "Yeah, apparently having a gay best friend means I'm secretly into you and don't know it yet." Her words. My stomach twisted. "Mike, I don't want to be the reason you." "You're not." He cut me off, voice sharp but tired. "She just doesn't get it. You've always been there for me. She wants me to stop talking to you. Stop hanging out. Stop." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's insane." He sank down onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a second, I just watched him, the rise and fall of his shoulders, the way his hands trembled. I'd seen him angry before, but not like this. This was exhaustion. A man pulled in two directions until something inside him began to tear. I sat down beside him, not too close. "You don't have to fix this tonight," I said softly. He laughed without humor. "You sound like my therapist." "You don't have one." "Yeah, maybe I should." He rubbed his eyes, sighing. "I don't even know who I am when I'm with her anymore. I'm always trying to prove something. That I'm loyal, that I'm straight, that I'm not." He didn't finish the sentence. "Not what?" I asked gently. He stared at the floor. Not confused. The silence that followed was heavy, like gravity had thickened. The hum of the fridge, the faint city noise outside. Everything faded until there was just the sound of our breathing. "Mike," I said, choosing my words carefully, "you don't owe anyone a definition. You're allowed to just feel what you feel." He looked up at me then, and something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Couldn't tell. "You always make things sound simple," he said quietly. "But it's not. Not for me." "I know," I said. "But it doesn't have to be war either." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't really agreeing. He was just trying to stay afloat. After that, neither of us spoke for a long time. The air between us felt strange, dense with something unsaid. I wanted to reach out, to rest my hand on his shoulder like I used to, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was hope. He leaned back against the couch, head tilted up, eyes closed. The light from the desk lamp softened his face, tracing every line of tension there. "You ever wish you could just disappear?" he asked suddenly. All the time, I said. Yeah, he murmured. Me too. For a while, that was all. Two people sitting in the dim light, quietly wishing for an escape. Then it happened. I don't even know who moved first. Maybe his hand brushed mine by accident. Maybe I didn't pull away fast enough. Maybe we were both just tired of pretending. Our fingers touched, barely, and the spark that shot through me was terrifying. I looked at him and he was already looking at me. His eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Something I'd seen in fleeting moments before but always told myself I imagined. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The distance between us closed by itself like gravity had made the choice for us. 1 second we were sitting there, and the next his lips were on mine. It was soft, clumsy, hesitant. A breath more than a kiss. But it carried everything we'd been choking down for months. Confusion, anger, longing, fear. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. My hands were still frozen on my lap. His lips lingered against mine like a question waiting for an answer. Then he pulled back. The shock in his eyes mirrored mine. He stood up quickly, taking a few steps away, breathing hard like he'd just realized he'd jumped off a cliff. I shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Mike! He shook his head, voice cracking. No, I'm sorry, okay? Before I could say anything, he grabbed his hoodie from the chair and headed for the door. Wait, I said, standing up. You don't have to. But the door was already closing. The click of the latch was louder than any slam. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door, my lips still tingling from the ghost of his touch. The room felt too quiet, too empty. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I sat back down slowly, running a hand over my face. What just happened? Part of me wanted to call him, to make it make sense, to say something, anything. But I didn't. Because how do you talk about a kiss that feels both impossible and inevitable? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second. The warmth of his mouth, the look in his eyes before he left, the tremor in his voice when he said I shouldn't have done that. He hadn't said he didn't want to, just that he shouldn't have. There's a difference. The next few days were torture. We saw each other in passing, in the hall, at the cafeteria, and every time, our eyes would meet for half a second before darting away. He'd act normal around others, laugh with his friends, but the moment he caught my eye, his face would falter, like a mask slipping. I tried to tell myself it meant nothing. Just an emotional night, a bad decision, a fluke. But my heart didn't buy it. Because that kiss wasn't empty. It wasn't casual. It was the kind of moment that rewrites everything quietly, without asking permission. On the 5th night, I found myself back on the couch where it happened. The room still smelled faintly like his cologne, that mix of cedar and rain I'd come to associate with comfort. I sat there, running my fingers along the fabric, wondering if he was thinking about it too. Wondering if he hated himself for it or if he was just scared. Maybe both. I wanted to text him, to ask if we were okay. But I couldn't bring myself to hit send. Every draft felt wrong. Too cold, too desperate, too raw. So instead, I whispered it into the quiet. Mike, what are we doing? The question hung there unanswered. And deep down, I already knew that silence would last a long time. Because some truths don't explode, they simmer. And this one had just started to boil. 2 days passed. 2 long, heavy, suffocating days where time seemed to exist only to remind me that something had changed. Something neither of us was brave enough to name. I went through the motions. Class, coffee, pretending to laugh at group chats I barely read. But every quiet moment circled back to that night. The look in his eyes, the taste of something forbidden lingering like static in the air. And the silence after. No texts, no knocks, no mic. Until the 3rd night. It was late past 11. The city outside was muted, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper. I just started to convince myself to sleep when the pounding started. Not a polite knock, a furious one. 3 sharp bangs that rattled the door. My stomach twisted before I even moved. When I opened it, Mike was standing there, breathless, sweating, eyes burning with something between rage and panic. "Mike," I said softly. "What?" He didn't let me finish. He pushed past me, running a hand through his damp hair. His shirt was clinging to his chest, the fabric dark at the collar where sweat had soaked through. "She's gone," he said, voice cracking. "She walked out." I froze by the door. "Tara?" He nodded, pacing the room like a storm that couldn't find a place to break. "She accused me again. Said I'm lying to her. Said—" He stopped, biting the inside of his cheek. "Said I'm in love with you." The words hung there, electric, dangerous. I felt my heart drop and rise all at once. "Mike!" He turned to me, his jaw tight, his eyes raw. "I told her she was crazy, that she was jealous for no reason, that you're my best friend and nothing more." His voice cracked on nothing more. He looked away, pacing again. "She said I was lying, that she could see it, in the way I talk about you, the way I look at you." The air in the room was thick. "She left in tears," he continued. "Said she couldn't be with someone who's halfway in another world." I watched him carefully, the twitch in his hand, the way his chest rose and fell too fast. He wasn't just angry, he was unraveling. "Mike," I said gently, "maybe you should sit down." He shook his head. "I can't sit still. I feel like I'm losing my mind." I took a slow step closer. "You're not." He gave a hollow laugh. "Aren't I? She's saying I'm in love with my best friend, and I can't even tell her she's wrong without wondering if she's right." That last word hit me like a fist to the chest. He turned toward me then, and his eyes, red, exhausted, fierce, locked on mine. "Tell me I'm not losing it, Matt. Tell me this is just stress or guilt or whatever." I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell him exactly what he needed to hear. That he was fine. That it was just confusion. That the kiss meant nothing. That we could erase it and go back to the easy comfort we used to have. But I couldn't lie. Not anymore. "You're not crazy," I said quietly. "You're human." He blinked, thrown by the calm in my voice. "What does that even mean?" "It means you don't have to fight every feeling that doesn't fit into a box. You're allowed to feel confused, Mike." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down, shaking his head. "You don't get it. I've spent my whole life knowing who I am. I can't." His voice trailed off into a whisper. "I can't be this." He pressed the heel of his palm against his forehead, like he was trying to hold himself together. "Be what?" I asked softly. "Whatever this is," he muttered. "I don't want it. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt you." I stepped closer. He didn't back away this time. "You're not hurting me," I said. "You're just trying to understand yourself. That's not a crime." He laughed bitterly, meeting my eyes. "It feels like one. It's not." He stared at me, really stared, like he was trying to find an anchor in my face. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't fighting Tara anymore. He was fighting himself. The version of him that had always been certain, that had always known exactly where the lines were. Except now those lines were blurred, and I was standing right in the middle of them. "I can't think straight around you," he said quietly, almost like a confession. "Everything gets mixed up. She says your name, and my stomach twists. You text me and I drop everything. It's like—" He trailed off, searching for words that didn't exist. "Like what?" I asked. He took a shaky breath. "Like you've gotten under my skin." My pulse quickened. "Mike, I hate that she's right," he said, voice trembling. "Because if she is, then what does that make me?" I took another step closer, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "It makes you someone who cares. That's it. You don't have to label it. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." He looked down at the floor, jaw tightening, breathing uneven. "I've been trying so hard to prove her wrong that I forgot what I was even fighting for." "Maybe you were fighting yourself," I said softly. He glanced up again, eyes glossy under the dim light. For a moment the room was silent, just the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, steady and slow, like it was giving us permission to breathe. Then, something in him seemed to break. His shoulders dropped, His breathing slowed. The anger in him didn't vanish, but it shifted, changed into something heavier, quieter. He sank down onto the couch, hands gripping his knees, staring at the floor. I stood a few feet away, afraid to move. When I finally sat beside him, he didn't flinch. He just kept breathing slow, uneven breaths that sounded like surrender. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," I said. "You don't owe anyone an answer. Not me, not her, not even yourself." He let out a low, shaky laugh. "You always say the right thing. I say what's true." He turned his head slightly toward me. Our eyes met, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. That familiar pull was there again, the one we both tried to ignore. The air between us changed, thick with something that wasn't anger or confusion anymore. It was longing, quiet, patient, terrifying. For a fleeting second, I thought he'd close the distance between us. His gaze dropped to my lips, and I could feel the tension hum through the air like static. But instead, he exhaled and leaned back. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said finally, voice soft, almost broken. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. We sat there in silence. The city hummed faintly outside. A passing car, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of wind against the window pane. Inside, everything felt suspended. After a long while, he rubbed his hands together and said, "I should go." "You can stay," I said quickly, surprising myself. He looked at me, half smiling in that tired, sad way that said he wanted to but couldn't. "If I stay, I'll forget what I'm supposed to be running from." I swallowed. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. He didn't answer, just stood, ran a hand through his hair again, and gave me a look I couldn't quite name, something between gratitude and regret. "I'll see you," he said softly, and walked out. The door clicked shut, gentle but final. I sat there long after he left, the sound of his words echoing in my head like a record that wouldn't stop spinning. I don't know who I am anymore, and maybe, deep down, I didn't either, because somewhere in the middle of his confusion, I'd lost my own sense of direction too. The night stretched on, and I stayed on the couch until morning, waiting for a knock that never came. But part of me knew he'd be back, not because he wanted to, but because whatever was happening between us wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next day felt like punishment. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. I woke up early, checked my phone before even sitting up. No messages, no calls, no new notifications. The silence between us had turned from tension into something heavier, something colder. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I sent him a text. "Hey, are you okay?" No reply. 2 hours later, just checking in. "We don't have to talk about the other night." Still nothing. By evening, I called him twice. The first went to voicemail. The second rang until it stopped. It felt like standing outside a locked door, knocking until my knuckles bled. When I finally saw him the next morning on campus, it was by accident. He was crossing the courtyard, talking to a classmate, laughing, or at least pretending to. For a second, my chest lightened. Maybe things weren't as bad as I thought. "Mike!" I called out. He turned, our eyes met, just for a fraction of a second. Then he looked away, walked right past me as if I wasn't even there. The world didn't stop, but something inside me did. I stood frozen in the middle of the walkway, watching him disappear into the crowd. That look, or the lack of one, hurt more than any argument ever could. It wasn't rejection. It was erasure. And somehow that was worse. The next few days were a blur of trying to act fine while everything inside me was coming apart. In class, I couldn't focus. I kept seeing him everywhere. His hoodie in the distance, his voice in someone else's laughter. My phone would buzz, and I'd feel that brief, stupid spark of hope before realizing it wasn't him. At night, I replayed everything in my head. The kiss, the words, the way his hand trembled when he said he didn't know who he was anymore. I kept asking myself if I'd pushed him too far, crossed a line I shouldn't have. Maybe I'd ruined the one friendship that had ever truly mattered. Still, even through the guilt, the memory of that night haunted me. The softness of it, the confusion, the honesty in his eyes before he ran. It wasn't anger I saw in him. It was fear, and that made me wonder. Was he avoiding me because he regretted it? Or because he didn't? 3 days later, Tara posted a photo on her social media. Her smiling. Mike, beside her, arm around her shoulder. Caption: "We all make mistakes. Glad we found our way back, 2 hearts." The words hit like ice water. I stared at the screen until the image blurred. There it was, the version of him he wanted the world to see. Smiling. Straight. Normal. Maybe that was his way of fixing everything. Pretend it never happened. Pretend I never happened. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt empty. Because what hurt most wasn't the photo. It was knowing he'd chosen silence over truth. That night, I was sitting on my bed with a book I wasn't really reading when my phone finally buzzed. Mike. For a moment, I just stared at the name on the screen, afraid to answer. Then I did. "Hello." His voice was quiet, rough around the edges. "Can I come over?" My pulse jumped. "Yeah, of course." 15 minutes later, there was a knock. This time not furious, just hesitant. When I opened the door, he looked different, tired, uneasy, human. His hoodie sleeves were pushed halfway up his forearms, hands buried in the pockets like he was holding himself together. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." He stepped inside, standing in the same spot where he'd stood the night everything broke. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt like glass again. Fragile, dangerous, one wrong word away from shattering. Finally, I broke the silence. "I saw the photo." He exhaled, long and slow. "Yeah, I figured you might." "So, you're back together?" He nodded once, eyes fixed on the floor. Sort of. Sort of." He rubbed his neck. "It's complicated. Everything with you seems to be," I said before I could stop myself. He flinched slightly but didn't argue. "I didn't come here to talk about her," he said quietly. "Then why did you come?" He looked up, eyes raw. "Because I can't stop thinking about that night." My heart skipped. "Mike." "No, let me say this," he interrupted, voice trembling. "I've been trying to bury it, to convince myself it was just stress, or guilt, or confusion. But every time I close my eyes, it's there. I didn't move, didn't breathe." He continued. "She said I was different lately, that I've been distant. And she's right, because part of me is still stuck in that moment, wondering why it happened, what it means." His words came out in pieces, each one heavier than the last. I took a step closer. "Then stop wondering." He blinked. "What?" "Stop trying to make sense of it like it was a mistake. It wasn't." He looked startled, like he'd expected guilt, not honesty. "I don't regret what happened," I said, my voice steady even as my chest tightened. "And I'm not trying to steal you or make you feel something you don't. I just want the truth between us. No pretending." He stared at me, silent, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. "You kissed me," I said softly. "And for a moment you didn't pull away. That has to mean something." He closed his eyes, shoulders shaking slightly. "I don't know what I feel anymore, Matt. I've never been this drawn to someone before. Not like this. Not with anyone." The words cracked in the air between us. My throat went dry. "Then stop fighting it." He shook his head, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "It's not that simple. Everything I've built my life on, who I thought I was, it doesn't make sense anymore. And I'm scared. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that." I stepped forward, close enough to see the pulse beating in his neck, to feel the tremor in his breath. "You don't have to do anything. You don't have to name it or fix it. Just feel it." He looked at me like I'd said something dangerous, something he'd wanted to hear but wasn't ready to believe. The silence that followed was thick, charged. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on my desk. His eyes dropped to my lips, just for a second, and I felt that same pulse of heat from before, the one we'd both been trying to outrun. But this time he didn't move closer. Instead, he took a deep breath and whispered, "You make everything harder." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Maybe that's what honesty does. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I can't do this to her. I can't do this to myself. I sat beside him carefully, leaving just enough space between us for the truth to breathe. You're not doing anything wrong, I said. You're just being honest about what's inside you. He looked at me then, really looked, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. Why does it have to be you? He whispered. I didn't have an answer. Maybe because I'd always been there. Maybe because he finally felt safe enough to fall apart in front of me. Or maybe because, deep down, he'd been falling for longer than either of us realized. I don't know, I said quietly. But I'm here. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. That's what scares me. We sat there in the half-dark, neither speaking, the distance between us small but full of everything we couldn't say. For once, I didn't reach out. I let the silence be what it was. An invisible line drawn between two hearts, both afraid to cross it again. And maybe that was what love sometimes looked like. Not the crossing, but the stillness before it. Mike started showing up again. Not all at once, but in quiet, cautious increments, like a tide testing how far it could reach before pulling back. The first time, it was under the pretense of borrowing a book. He texted late on a Thursday night. Hey, do you still have that novel about the guy lost in the mountains? He didn't even like reading. Still, I said yes. And 20 minutes later, there was a knock. He looked tired, like always, but softer this time. Less storm, more fog. When I handed him the book, he didn't leave. He lingered, glancing around the room like it had changed somehow. Can I stay for a bit? He asked. Yeah, I said. Of course. We didn't talk about anything heavy that night. Just small things, classes, music, the weather. He laughed once, quietly, and for a second I saw the old Mike, the one who used to light up rooms without realizing it. When he left, he said, "Thanks. I needed a breather." And that was how it began, the slow, careful rhythm of his returns. He started coming by more often after that. Sometimes he'd show up after midnight, claiming he couldn't sleep. Other times it was just for coffee, or a break from everything. I stopped asking why. It was easier to let the routine find its own shape. He'd sit on my couch, legs stretched out, watching the city lights flicker through the window while I worked at my desk. Every so often, he'd toss out a comment about a class, a funny professor, the new coffee shop near campus. I'd answer, and our words would settle somewhere between us, unspoken but understood. We didn't touch. We didn't talk about that night. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of tension, of peace, of something fragile we both guarded like a secret we weren't ready to lose. One evening, he showed up with 2 cups of coffee, and that sheepish half-smile he wore when he didn't want to explain himself. "Don't say anything," he warned as he handed me one. "I figured I owed you caffeine for putting up with me." "Put up with you?" I smirked. "That's a full-time job." He laughed, leaning against the counter. "You make it look easy." We sat on the couch, the TV muted, rain starting to tap softly against the windows. It was late, and the world outside felt far away. He watched the raindrops slide down the glass. You ever think about how everything just keeps moving no matter what happens? Like, the world doesn't care who breaks up, who fights, who screws up. Sounds comforting, I said. He glanced at me. Yeah, in a depressing kind of way. We smiled at the same time, that familiar, quiet exchange that said more than words could. Over the next few weeks, those moments multiplied, little snapshots of something steady in the chaos. He'd bring snacks sometimes or sit quietly while I studied. We'd talk about nothing, and somehow that meant everything. Once, he fell asleep on the couch mid-conversation. I covered him with a blanket and stood there for too long, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. There was no longing in it that night, just peace. Maybe that was love too. Not the rush, but the stillness that came after. It was a rainy Saturday when everything shifted again. I remember it clearly. The sound of thunder rolling far off, the smell of wet concrete drifting through the open window. I was making tea when he walked in, drenched from the storm, hair dripping, hoodie clinging to him. I forgot an umbrella, he said, brushing water from his arms. Clearly, I said, handing him a towel. He smiled faintly, rubbing at his hair. Guess I just needed an excuse to stop by. He didn't mean to say it, I could tell. It slipped out honest and unguarded. I didn't tease him. I just gestured toward the couch. Sit down before you catch a cold. He did, wrapping the towel around his shoulders like a blanket. The rain grew heavier outside, the steady rhythm filling the quiet between us. After a while, he said, I broke up with her. The words landed like thunder, soft at first, then shaking everything inside me. I turned to him slowly. You what? He nodded, staring at his hands. Tara, it's done. It's been done for a week, but I didn't know how to say it out loud. Why? He exhaled, his voice low. Because I couldn't keep pretending. I was lying to her, to myself. It wasn't fair. I sat down beside him, careful, quiet. Does anyone know? He shook his head. No. And I don't think I'm ready for them to. Rain drummed harder against the window. The room felt heavier but not suffocating. More like an exhale after a long-held breath. I'm sorry, I said softly. For what? For everything this has done to you. He looked up then, meeting my eyes. You didn't do anything to me, Matt. You just made it impossible for me to keep lying. That hit deeper than I expected. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The rain kept falling, steady and soft, and we sat there in that fragile quiet, the weight of honesty pressing down but somehow lifting us both at once. After a while, he whispered, What happened that night? It wasn't nothing. My heart stumbled. He looked at me, really looked, the way people do when they've run out of ways to hide. I tried to make it go away, pretend it didn't matter. But it did. It does. I swallowed hard. Mike, I'm not saying I understand it, he continued, voice trembling. I just know that it changed something in me, and no matter how hard I fight it, it's still there. He hesitated, his hand twitching slightly against his knee before he finally reached across the small distance between us. When his fingers brushed mine, I felt the air shift. Not charged this time, not impulsive. Just real. He didn't pull away. I didn't either. His hand trembled in mine, not out of fear, but because he knew exactly what he was choosing. For a long moment we stayed like that, the storm outside echoing the quiet storm inside us. There was no kiss, no confession beyond what was already said. Just two people holding on to something fragile and fierce, something they couldn't name but couldn't deny. I could feel the warmth of his palm, the pulse under his skin. Every unspoken word between us lived in that touch. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know what happens next. I smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. Maybe we don't need to know yet. He looked down at our joined hands, then back at me. This can't be real. It already is, I said. The rain began to ease, tapering into a soft drizzle. The storm was passing. We sat there until the room grew dim, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. Neither of us moved to turn on the lamp. It didn't feel like hiding anymore. Felt like peace, fragile, secret, but real. When he finally stood to leave, he lingered by the door. You know this can't be easy, right? I nodded. Nothing worth it ever is. He smiled, small, tired, but honest. Then he was gone, leaving behind the smell of rain and the echo of everything we hadn't said. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd stood, the warmth of his hand still ghosting against mine. For the first time in months, I didn't feel lost. What we had wasn't loud or certain, but it was ours. A secret that didn't need to be shouted to be true. And even if it couldn't exist in daylight yet, I knew one thing for sure. It was real enough to wait for. Time has a strange way of moving after everything changes. It doesn't rush forward or rewind. It drifts. Softly, cautiously, as if it knows the ground beneath your feet isn't stable anymore. Weeks passed after that night. The rain faded, but its echo seemed to linger between us. An invisible rhythm that guided how we moved around each other. Mike still came by, though less predictably now. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for just 5 minutes. Sometimes just to sit in silence. Other times, he'd talk about everything except what mattered most. But people noticed his absence elsewhere. Tara's friends whispered about it first. Their posts online stopped including his name. Their group photos no longer tagged him. The silence from their corner of campus was loud enough to draw attention. Rumors, of course, filled the space where truth wouldn't go. Did you hear Mike and Tara broke up? Yeah, he's been acting weird lately. Someone said he's hanging out with that guy again. You know, him. The words traveled fast, reshaped by every mouth they passed through, until even people who didn't know us had opinions. When I walked across campus, I could feel it. The stares, the pauses in conversation. Not cruel exactly, but curious. The kind of curiosity that slices in small, quiet ways. Mike heard them too. He didn't tell me at first, but I could see it in the way he'd glance over his shoulder when we walked together, or the way his smile faltered when someone from his old circle passed by without saying hi. One afternoon, he showed up at my apartment with a worn hoodie pulled low over his face. He looked like someone trying to disappear. People are talking, he said flatly, collapsing onto the couch. I know, I said. They think I'm different. I sat beside him carefully. Are you? He glanced at me, a small, bitter smile tugging at his lips. That's the problem. I don't even know what different means anymore. There wasn't much to say after that. So I didn't. He stayed for hours, saying almost nothing. Just staring at the TV, volume low, pretending to follow the news. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix it. Sometimes, silence was the only safe place left. In public, he became quieter, more withdrawn. His friends, the ones who used to slap him on the back and drag him to parties, now greeted him with uncertainty. Some stopped altogether. They think I've changed, he told me one night, pacing the small stretch of floor in my living room. That I'm not me anymore. I leaned back against the wall. Maybe they just don't know the real you. He laughed. A dry, empty sound. I don't know the real me either, Matt. Then maybe that's what this is about. Finding out. He stopped pacing. That sounds easy when you say it. It's not. But it's worth it. He looked at me, and for a second, something softened. You actually believe that, don't you? I have to, I said. Otherwise none of this means anything. He sank onto the couch again, burying his face in his hands. I wish I had your courage. I smiled faintly. You do. You just haven't used it yet. He stayed the night again. Not like before, not with confusion or tension, but with quiet acceptance. We didn't talk much. He fell asleep on the couch, and I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the rain-slick pavement. There was peace in that silence, even if it wasn't easy. Days turned into weeks. By then, most of campus had moved on to new gossip, new drama, new distractions. But the whispers about Mike never fully disappeared. They followed in half-sentences and side glances. I learned to tune them out. He didn't. Once, in the cafeteria, I caught a group of guys laughing as he walked by. Their words were low, but not low enough. Something about switching teams. Something about his gay roommate. Before I could stand up, he was already gone. That night, I found him on the steps behind the gym, alone. Hoodie pulled up, cigarette burning slowly between his fingers. You don't smoke, I said quietly. He gave a humorless laugh. Guess I do now. I sat beside him, close but not too close. The night air was cold enough to sting. I shouldn't care what they say, he murmured. I know that, but it's like every word sticks somewhere inside me. You're human, I said. You can only take so much. He nodded slowly, watching the smoke curl up into the dark. It's easier for you, is it? You've had time to figure this out, he said. To own it. I'm still pretending I'm fine when I'm not. I wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. He turned the cigarette out against the step and stared ahead. I'm scared, Matt. Not of them. Of me. Of what I might become if I stop pretending. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I didn't try to reassure him. I just said, whatever you become, It'll still be you. Just a freer version. He smiled faintly, eyes glinting under the dull light. You make it sound so simple. It isn't, I said. But it starts with honesty. He nodded, looking down at his hands. You've always had that. Honesty. I envy it. I took a slow breath. It's not bravery, Mike. It's survival. You either live as yourself, or you slowly fade pretending to be someone else. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. We kept seeing each other after that, quietly, privately. Sometimes he'd come over with no words, just a tired smile. Sometimes he'd sit beside me on the balcony, watching the city lights stretch across the horizon. We didn't talk about love. We didn't talk about labels. But something unspoken had taken root between us. Gentle, patient, real. One night, near the end of the semester, he showed up at my door later than usual. The sky outside was navy blue, the kind that melts slowly into dawn. He looked calmer this time. Not happy exactly, but lighter. I talked to my parents today, he said as he stepped in. I blinked. About? He shrugged, kicking off his shoes. Not everything. Just enough to make them worry. I smiled carefully. How'd that go? He huffed a laugh. They asked if I was okay. I said I was figuring things out. My dad told me to take it one day at a time. My mom said she loved me no matter what. That's a start, I said. He nodded. Yeah. We sat on the couch, the hum of the fridge the only sound between us. After a while, he turned toward me. You know what I realized? He asked. What? You never pushed me. Not once. Even when I was a mess. I looked at him, surprised. You didn't need pushing. You just needed space. He smiled softly, his voice quieter now. No. I needed you. That stopped me cold. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. You stayed. When everyone else judged, you didn't. You just stayed. For a second, my throat tightened too much to speak. Someone had to. I finally whispered. We sat there like that, letting the weight of those words settle. After a while, he said, Thank you. For what? For being the calm in all this noise. He didn't take my hand this time, didn't need to. The distance between us felt comfortable, earned. Later, just before sunrise, we moved out to the balcony. The air was cool, the kind that smelled like wet pavement and beginnings. The city was still half asleep, painted in soft gray light. He leaned against the railing, mug in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. You ever think about how different things could have been? All the time, I said. He smiled faintly. But maybe this is how it's supposed to go. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the light grow behind the skyline, bleeding gold through the clouds. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it wasn't clear. But it was real. He turned toward me, eyes soft. You think people can ever really be free? I looked at him, the tension finally gone from his shoulders, the quiet peace in his expression. I think freedom starts small, I said. Sometimes it's not a big announcement. Sometimes it's just choosing not to hide anymore. He nodded slowly, eyes reflecting the early morning light. We stood there in silence, the city waking around us. The first birds began to call, and the sun edged higher, brushing everything in pale gold. I found myself thinking about everything we'd been through. The confusion, the fear, the late nights spent trying to define what couldn't be defined. Maybe we didn't need a label yet. Maybe what we had didn't fit into any box the world would understand. But I knew this much. It was love in its truest, quietest form. Love that didn't demand, didn't rush, didn't try to make sense of itself before it was ready. Love that simply was. As the sun broke fully over the skyline, I turned to him and said softly, Maybe what we are doesn't need a label yet. Sometimes love begins in the quiet space between fear and honesty. He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. The city was alive again now, full of noise and movement and stories starting all over. But up there on that balcony we were still, two people on the edge of something unnamed but true. I didn't know where his journey would take him or ours. But as I watched him bathed in the first light of morning, I knew one thing for certain. When he finally learned to be free, I'd be right there, waiting in the quiet, where it all began.